And for more insight into this visit, let's bring in Liang. She's chair professor of economics at Willamette University. Always good to have you on the show. And first of all, I'd like to try and get an idea of what are the key goals in this dialogue for both parties.
Yeah, good to talk to you, Diego. So I think these talks are really trying to address the relationships between the two parts. China and EU, they have already established, many of strategic relationships, and this relationship has lasted for over 50 years. And so now I think there are some tensions on trade between China and EU, but also between, all the rest of the world with the United States. So I think it is a very critical time for both sides to settle some of the differences and really together uphold multilateral trading system, and to also dissolve some of the differences between the two in order to enhance the relationships when it comes to trade, investment, climate initiative cooperations, and some other geopolitical, cooperations.
And at the same time, there are always discussions about rare earths, all these very strategic elements. How significant are rare earths to European industry? And at the same time, what kind of discussions are they, do you believe they're having around these topics?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the rare earth exports from China is very important for EU, and that would be a central topic during the summit later this month. And so I think, as you mentioned, the rare earth is important not only for the defense industry, but also very importantly for many of the industrial sector, producing EVs, any other electronics. You do need these kinds of rare earth minerals, and China has the monopoly in processing some of these, especially the heavy, the rare earth minerals. So I think, this is a talk that would be very important to sort of set the record straight, where China needs to safeguard its own strategic interests and also making sure these dual uses rare earth minerals are in good hands. On the other hand, I think EU would like to get, assets, legitimate assets from China to be able to support their defense industry and also their industrial production. So I think, there are common grounds, there are common interests between the two sides to establish mutually beneficial and also safe multilateral, bilateral trading relationships. So I believe that two sides will come to in good faith and would have a productive talk over rare earth exports and other related topics.
Yang, do you believe that the U.S. China trade tensions have an impact on these discussions?
Absolutely. I think the U.S.'s unilateral, tariffs on EU and on China would have a very large bearing on some of these bilateral relationships. I think, as I mentioned earlier, this is a critical time for China and EU to come together and uphold the multilateral principle, which I think both sides really take this very seriously and dearly. China and EU, they are really important trading partners. Two-way trade reached 800 billion euros last year, and the two-way FDI stock was $380 billion. And so there are a lot of common grounds for the two sides to be able to want to, open for open for trade, open for investment, open for some very important green energy and, urban green urbanization kind of initiatives. So I think there are a lot of common grounds for both sides to work together to together confront the kind of unilateralism coming from the United States, I think both in principle and also in practice.
Yeah, but at the same time, the world seems to be moving toward, more trade barriers, more higher tariffs, more protectionism. How do you think negotiators are dealing with that right now in these conversations between the EU and China?
Right. Well, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I think, trade is not a zero-sum game. Despite what Donald Trump has been talking about, if a country is running a trade deficit, that means the country is losing. That is completely making no economic sense whatsoever. So I think, trade deficits or surplus does not mean a country is losing the ground. But at the same time, I agree that right now the EU and China trade imbalance is that EU is running a trade deficit with China. But all of these, I think, can be negotiated. There are a lot of differences in terms of the interests and also in terms of their comparative advantage, right? The specific, industrial strength. So I think a lot of these can be negotiated. For example, on the EV space, EU is worried about losing their market share with China's EV exports to EU, and therefore they have raised the EV tariffs as high as 45.3% to certain car brands. But I think that is very counterproductive. I think what really needs to happen is for both sides to come together and think about what are the ways to carve out the market and to cooperate when it comes to, for example, joint ventures. To reduce China's exports of EV to EU, well, you could simply welcome some Chinese investments within the EU, and so China can produce for the EU market at EU. And so I think that would help to create jobs. It would help to transfer some technological, technologies, and also help to boost really the good sentiment, right? The mutually beneficial kind of cooperation between two sides.